What's up guys, I'm Dean and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm doing the first episode of my first series, and that is a very simple concept. I'm going to talk about every movie I watched this month of May. In the next month I'll talk about every movie I watched that month and I'll give you my thoughts and so on and so forth until the end of time. But today let's just stick with every movie I watched in May 2021. That being said, I haven't really watched a massive amount of movies this month. Only 14. I had exams at the start of this month. That's why I haven't particularly watched that many. But still, let's talk about these 14 movies one by one, and I'll give you my thoughts on all of them, as well as a score out of 5 stars. So the first movie I watched this month was a new movie on Netflix, and that is The Mitchells vs. the Machines. I think it was really good. I had a lot of fun with it. I think it's very well animated. It did kind of remind me of Spider-Verse, just not as good. And I think it was funny, and I think the characters worked well. Just at times, the plot was a little predictable, and I think the action at times was quite generic. Apart from that, though, I really loved it, and I gave it 3.5 stars out of 5. The second movie I watched this month was Raiders of the Lost Ark. Of course, I've seen this movie before, but why wouldn't I rewatch it? It is one of my favourite movies ever. I did mention it in my top 50 favourite movies ever. I think there's some really amazing action. There's some really cool moments. It's just cool all round, and Harrison Ford in it is amazing. And I think it has some of the most iconic scenes in cinema history. Everything about this movie works. I gave it 4.5 stars because I really, really love it. Talking about another classic, the third movie I watched in the month of May was The Incredibles, my favourite Pixar movie and one of my favourite movies ever. This was also mentioned in my top 50 favourite movies ever. I think it works so well as a superhero movie because I think they're so good at world building and establishing this family of characters. I think the relationship between Bob and Helen was a real standout for me as well. And Syndrome is a great villain in this, even though he's not in it a lot. He really, really works, and just every single member of the family, and Frozone and Syndrome, all work so well, and they have interactions with each other that feel so real. The Incredibles, one of the best superhero movies ever in my opinion. It is great stuff, so of course I gave it 5 stars out of 5. Okay, then I took a week's break because of exams, and the movie that brought me back was Captain Marvel. I think it's an underrated movie. I watched it because my mum had never seen it before. It's the only MCU movie she hadn't seen, so I watched it again, and it stands up. It still holds its own. I think it's got some really solid stuff in there. I think Brie Larson is amazing. So is Samuel Jackson. The real standout for me is Ben Mendelsohn. His Skrull is so amazing, and that twist with the Skrulls near the end of the movie works so great as well. It's such an intelligent twist, and I think there's some really great action, some really great characters, and I really like the time place they've decided to show this movie in. It does have some issues. I'm not a fan of like the crew world and the world building there. It all feels very generic to me, and I think there are some iffy scenes and things like that. But overall, I really like Captain Marvel, and I think it is underrated. I gave it 3 stars out of 5. In the UK, cinemas reopened this month on the 17th of May, and on the 19th of May, I went to see my first movie in the cinema all year, and it was Peter Rabbit 2. You know, it's a bit of a letdown. It wasn't amazing. There was some solid stuff in there. I'm a fan of the first Peter Rabbit movie, despite my distaste for James Corden. I think Domhnall Gleeson really carries that movie, and I think this movie, the sequel, has some solid moments and has some good jokes, but I think they went too big and they kind of Americanized the plot and the movie, which isn't always a bad thing, but it doesn't work here. And somehow they Americanized the movie so much, but had a subplot about how Americanizing stuff is bad. It wasn't as funny, it wasn't as endearing, and it was just way too over the top for me, which does sound a bit silly when I'm talking about a movie with a gang of talking rabbits. But that being said, Domhnall Gleeson was still great in this, but I had to give it 2.5 stars, I'm afraid. The very next day I went back to the cinema though and watched a better movie. Was it better by a lot? No, it wasn't. It was Mortal Kombat, the new one, of course. I've got a full review for this on my channel as well, so please check that out if you haven't already. And I thought it was one of the dumbest movies I've seen in a long time, but there was still something undeniably fun about it. All the characters in it are absolutely stupid and two-dimensional, and like the main character is nothing. It's just a shell of a man. There's nothing to his character apart from the fact he has a family, and he's not even the worst character. There's no real good characters in this, and the plot doesn't make any sense, but what carries this movie is, of course, the fight scenes, because they are so good. There are some amazing fight scenes in here, some amazing moments, some great choreography, and some pretty good jokes as well. Of course, the highlight for me has to be Scorpion vs Sub-Zero, round 1 and round 2. It was just undeniably fun and goofy and stupid, and I loved that about it. It kind of accepted the fact that it's dumb, so I gave it 3 out of 5 stars, a little begrudgingly. The next movie I watched was another rewatch and another MCU movie. This time I watched it because it's the only MCU movie my girlfriend hasn't seen, and it is Spider-Man Far From Home. Easily one of my favourite Spider-Man movies. It's definitely up there, and one of the better MCU movies all round. I think it's got some really solid stuff in there. Mysterio, I think, is the real star of this movie, in the twist near the beginning, and just how manic he is, and how great Jake Gyllenhaal pulls that off, and that nightmare sequence about at the start of the third act with Tom Holland. I think it's really great stuff there. And I also think this has kind of a fresh style of comedy compared to the rest of the MCU. It kind of goes for a more goofy and fun style of comedy, which I really love. The teachers are the best at that, especially the scene when he drops the camera in the ocean. To me, that is probably the funniest scene in the MCU. But like I said, action is great, villain is great, the comedy is great, and as always, Tom Holland does a good job as Spider-Man. I'm looking forward to the third one immensely. So I gave it 4 stars out of 5. Spoiler alert, onto another 5-star movie, which is also another rewatch. That is Ferris Buellers Day Off. I think this movie is undeniably fun. It's another one I did talk about in my top 50 favourite movies ever. And it's just undeniably fun and cool. And Ferris Bueller is a mean character, but he's a great guy still. I have a working theory about this movie taking place in the Groundhog Day universe, and I wrote a very, very long letterboxd review about that. Check that out, please, because I feel like it's a complete waste of time. It was a complete waste of time, I just need justification. But great movie, it's fun, the soundtrack is fun, the performances are great, it's silly, it's goofy, and it's undeniably cool. So like I said, 5 out of 5 stars. Now on to a less good movie and another new release on Netflix, and that is Army of the Dead. I also have a full review of that on this channel, so go check it out if you haven't already. That's going to be the last plug, probably. I think it's a fun movie in some respects, but it kind of has this idea of it being a heist zombie movie and having these intelligent zombies, and I don't think it delivers fully on either of these ideas. It's barely a heist movie, and these intelligent zombies don't really feel like a focus to me. It feels like you could take them out and it wouldn't be that much different. Another complaint I would have about this movie, which I don't think I said in the video, is there's no reason why it needs to be set in Las Vegas. That feels like a fun, inviting thing that you could do with this movie to make it feel different, but Las Vegas is barely a focus after the first 10 minutes, which also annoys me a bit. The characters are pretty dull, and the cinematography isn't as good as you'd expect from Zack Snyder. There's some really blurry stuff. There's some fun moments, but overall it is also just way too long, so I had to give this 2 stars out of 5. Next movie I watched in May was A Quiet Place. This was my first watching of this, and I now understand the hype of people who really love this movie, because I think it is so tense, so scary, and there's some really powerful and emotional performances, specifically John Krasinski and Emily Blunt. But the child actors aren't terrible either, which is always a plus in movies. I think I didn't like this movie as much as I otherwise would have if I watched it in a cinema, because I think this movie is kind of like a phenomenon and an event film, which I didn't get to watch it in the cinema, so I probably wouldn't score as high as if I would otherwise. But apart from that, some really great horror. 3.5 stars out of 5. Great stuff. Okay, so the most surprising movie on this list that I'm surprised that I liked was Cruella. It's the Cruella de Vil from 101 Dalmatians origin story. It's basically Joker. The plot is Joker, but with Cruella. But maybe I prefer this movie to Joker because it has an undeniable style, and there's something undeniably cool and stylish and fun about this movie. I think the soundtrack is pretty great. It can be a little long at times, and there's some real nonsensical plot points involving cliffs, which I'm sure you've heard about that. But apart from that, Emma Stone is great. Emma Thompson is great. Overall, great movie. I would recommend it. I would say it's also the best live-action Disney reboot or whatever, and to be honest, I would like to see more in this universe. I'm shocked that I'm saying this, but it's true. I really enjoyed this movie. So for all those reasons, I gave it 4 stars, and saying this I still feel weird because I thought it was going to be so bad, but it was surprisingly good. The next movie that I want to talk about that I watched this month was School of Rock. This was the first time I ever watched it, and it kind of did live up to the hype as well. Mainly because of Jack Black. Jack Black is amazing and he's really good in this. But the music is really cool, and I think the child actors are pretty solid, and it's surprisingly emotional. It's very funny, as you would expect. And if I mentioned that Jack Black is really good in it, because he's just amazing and he carries this entire film, so I gave it 4.5 stars out of 5. Really fun, really emotional, and there's like a strong message to it, which I wasn't really expecting. The penultimate movie I watched in the month of May was A Quiet Place Part 2. Did I think it was as good as the first Quiet Place? Probably not. I might have enjoyed it a little more because I was watching it in the cinema, and that does always help a viewing experience for me. But still, I don't think it was as good because they didn't really lean into the silence as much. I feel like there's way too much talking in this. And it did have some solid scenes, and I think it was a solid continuation of this universe. Emily Blunt and Millicent Simmons were the standouts for me, especially Millicent Simmons, and there were some really solid other characters in this as well. I think it was a great overall. I also gave this 3.5 stars, same as the first, A Quiet Place. The last movie I watched this month was The Way Back. It's on Disney Plus in the UK, and it's not really a movie I'd ever heard of before, but it's definitely worth the watch. The reason I watched it is because it's the favourite movie, or one of the favourites, of a good friend of mine on TikTok, and that's Peyton_JB. Check his channel out if you haven't already. But it's a really fun movie. Sam Rockwell is the standout for me in this, and Steve Carell plays a character who is so easy to hate. It's like a coming of age story, but it's a much more mature and slow coming of age story compared to a lot. But that doesn't mean it's boring. It's really fun, and there's some funny scenes in there. Like I said, Sam Rockwell plays this really laid back lifeguard, and he does such a good job in the role. Overall, I really enjoyed this movie. I gave it 4.5 stars, and I definitely would recommend it to anyone that hasn't watched it. So that's all the movies that I watched in May. Remember to give this video a like, please, and subscribe and comment. That still feels weird to say. And stick around for when I talk about every movie I watched in the month of June. I've already watched a couple already. Follow me on Letterboxd if you want to see reviews of all of these movies. There's a review for all of them, and some of them are longer, some of them are shorter than what I just said. And also check out my TikTok if you're not aware of it already. It's Deans__Beans. I'm planning some big stuff coming, and that's where I'm going to announce it. And thank you for watching. Tell me what other kind of videos you want, because I'm still looking for some ideas. And just give me your thoughts on the movies I watched, and tell me if I've got good or bad taste. I'm sure you're going to tell me that I have bad taste. I'm used to it by now. But thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye.